What shocking secret did you find out about your partner that made you call off the wedding? 6 months before my dream destination wedding cruise to New Brunswick, my significant other found his soulmate on Yahoo Chat. He eventually convinced her to visit, so this woman bussed up to Erie, Pennsylvania, his hometown, from some dirty southern state where they proceeded to bang. The sad and disgusting thing was she knew the whole time he was engaged, and the wedding was soon and mostly paid for. He didn't bother telling me the truth either. All he said was, I'm kind of stressed out right now, and I just want space. Being the good person that I am, I gave him all the space he wanted, and the only time we saw each other was during wedding planning. I have no clue why he even bothered at this point. After a few weeks of this, he finally got the balls to flat out tell me, it's over, but he refused to give me an explanation. He just said, we grew apart, or some nonsense like that. I later found out all the gory details from his sister, who cheated on and left her husband a year or so later. Guess it runs in the family. Unfortunately for him, they needed my signature to cancel the wedding plans, and his mom had paid for most of the wedding. His family was pretty rich by Erie standards. If only his mom wasn't such a great person and really nice to me and my family. I signed, we parted ways, I cried for a long time and had a series of short and meaningless relationships. Wounds healed, I got back to normal and went on with my life. During this whole time, I realized I was bisexual, and now I'm in a relationship with an awesome geeky gamer girl. I'm still friends with a few of his friends, so I heard bits and pieces of his life after all this happened. He dropped out of college to live with her, but after a few weeks, he met another soulmate and left. As far as I know, he's living in some crappy Pennsylvania town, working a minimum wage job and having his parents pay for almost everything. The icing on the cake? He was only 1 semester away from finishing college when he dropped out. Worthless student loans. Seriously, I hope he finds his way in life, but I feel like I'm entitled to a little bit of schadenfreude. This was in 2009, so those wounds have healed. I just find the whole thing funny now. Looking back, I realized what a huge bullet I dodged. I'm Neo-level lucky. Story 2. I called off my wedding recently due to a pregnancy that she decided to terminate while I was at work. We were not engaged as a result of the pregnancy or pressure from family and friends. We had fallen in love and moved in together over a 2-year period. Then, she took a pregnancy test due to a late period, and it was confirmed later that day by a doctor. I got excited. She got worried. Nothing I said seemed to calm her down. About a week into it, she told me she had terminated over a steak dinner. I harbored a lot of resentment toward her. For it, though, I told her I supported her and her decision. Over the ensuing 6 weeks or so, I started subconsciously distancing myself from her. While at home, I spent all of my time on the computer, playing video games, reading, etc. Then, I finally told her that I did not think I wanted to get married. She was devastated. A couple of days later, I came home from work, and she had taken everything that was hers or shared and left. That was 3 weeks ago tomorrow. Story 3. She cheated on me prior to getting engaged. I eventually forgave her and proposed while we were on vacation. A couple of months later was our anniversary, and we sent her kids to stay with their grandparents. While we were at dinner, the guy she cheated on me with walked in and got carried out. As soon as he left, he started texting her. I asked her not to respond. She talked about him nonstop for the rest of the night. The only time she stopped talking about him was when she was busy with me in bed. I checked the phone records the next day. She texted him as soon as I fell asleep that night. I did not say anything immediately. Instead, I started investigating. A week later, I told her that I knew she had texted him, and also that I discovered there were 6 other guys she cheated on me with. It was a really rough point in my life, especially because of her kids, who were already calling me dad. I am really glad that marriage never happened. Screw being married to someone so manipulative and deceitful. Story 4. One of my friends was engaged to a woman he was completely puppy dog in love with. It was a religious thing, and both were very strong, faithful Southern Baptists. The families knew one another, and he knew his future father-in-law as Daddy, the last name. The only thing a little odd about it was she was 16 and he was 20 when they met. He was going to wait until she was out of college, and they both made an abstinence commitment, and so on. While I am not Christian, I had respect for them because they really seemed like they were in love, and I respect those who have moral convictions they stick to if they do not hurt anyone else. When she turned 18, they got officially engaged, and she went to college several states away, an upright Christian-themed university everyone has heard of. This was the late 1990s, and being a tech-savvy person, my friend bought his fiancée a webcam. Back in those days, a webcam was very expensive, so that was a significant commitment. I think it was one of the first quick cam color models for $399, and they had to get 2, obviously. They spent many nights chatting. They planned their wedding, and both families were saving up for the wedding of the century when she graduated college. So my friend decides one day to surprise her on her birthday. He drives many hundreds of miles to see her at the university. When he shows up, he has to register at the front desk as this was a very secure campus. Then they had to have her paged and alert her parents a boy was visiting her, which they knew. She does not answer. So they asked her dorm roommate. Her roommate was a little surprised, asked a lot of questions, and seemed a little off-put. She confessed she did not know this girl had a boyfriend back home. She had expected a boy from a nearby university. I bet you can see where this was going. Well, he found out a lot about her during his trip. She had been routinely leaving campus as their detection and retention policy was voluntary, and had been sleeping around with many of the guys on the football team at that other university. Not only that, she was flunking college. When he confronted her, she burst into tears and admitted that she had the devil in her. She said she did not deserve to be married to him. She gave him back his ring, the webcam, and some other things he had bought her. She also returned his computer, which he had loaned her since her laptop could not run the webcam driver. When he took the computer home, he found hundreds of pictures of her posing semi-bare in lingerie, chat room logs, and so on. He was completely crushed. His no longer in-laws were floored when he returned. Both sets of parents did everything they could to resurrect the relationship. They sent the girl to some emergency Bible camp. But despite how these sorts of things turn out, my friend actually had enough common sense not to take her back. But it ruined him forever, I think. He had been dreaming of a perfect marriage for so long that he tried to get married the next year to another Southern Baptist, and that failed. Finally, he married another girl a year after that relationship ended, and he stayed married to her for about 5 years before she left him. Last I saw, he was a very bitter and shallow man, still devoted to Bible stuff, but wow. Story 5. My dad called off a wedding before he met my mother. He was with this woman who really pressured him into getting married. Basically, she just started wedding planning without a proposal, and my dad let it go too far. One night, she and her mother were discussing what food was going to be served at the reception, so they asked my dad what he thought, roasted chicken or beef, to which my dad replied, "I don't care which one you're having, because I'm not going to be there." Apparently, she bought her own ring, too. Story 6. People thought I was crazy. I was engaged to a gorgeous woman who was smart and hardworking. We had been together for a couple of years before getting engaged and were both fairly young. We had set the date 2 different times, and she came to me wanting to change it again. Recently, I had been seeing less and less of her, and she talked about hanging out with some guys from a bowling league. I could not stand these guys. I knew they had zero respect for me. We had been arguing about that situation, and I told her I did not want her hanging out with them without me. We began talking about why she wanted to change the date, and she was beating around the bush, talking about not being sure. I had a wave of realization wash over me and came to the conclusion it was done and finished. So I told her we were done and should cancel the wedding and break up. I remember it took me a good year to get over her. That is how much I loved her. It did not help that she did messed up things like send me explicit pictures, videos of herself, show up at my family events, and even sleep with other people occasionally. It hurt having to hear how she basically got passed around the bowling alley crew and did things to get favors. I kept most of this from my family and friends and never brought it up. Then, a couple of years later, I was with my family, and somehow the topic was brought up. They all got real quiet and did not want to talk about something that slipped out. I demanded that they go ahead and talk about it because it was obviously important. Apparently, she had cheated multiple times on me and lied to me about things she was doing. Having my family withhold information like that was awful. I am pretty sure they found out after we broke up and were just trying to protect me because they knew how hard I had taken it. For years, it was impossible to be completely free of her. My mother, for whatever reason, decided to maintain a relationship with her. So much so that even today, the girl gets things sent in the mail, like her precious Russian tea cakes. It blows my mind. It is almost like my own mother did not care about my feelings for those years by continuing her relationship with that woman. Her own family was furious and pissed at her. She got her own form of abuse for the failed marriage from her family. Now I need a good drink. Thanks, pal. Story 7. I was 18 and had just had a kid with my first boyfriend. Unfortunately, said boyfriend was abusive as hell, but I'd been putting up with it because I didn't know any better and didn't have family to help me out. The wedding was 2 weeks away. Invitations had gone out. I had my dress. Everything was ready to go. Then, one night, he starts up with his craziness. You never know what sets it off. And I was tired, so I didn't argue back. And when I didn't argue, he runs into my infant son's room, wakes him up by snatching him out of his crib, and threatens to leave with him and never come back. As I'm on my knees crying and begging him to please give me the baby, and he's holding the screaming child above me like someone holding a piece of steak just out of a dog's reach, I started thinking twice about the whole marriage thing. I did what I had to appease him that night, and the next day, day when he came home from work, he had no idea where I'd moved to. He did call his mother and tell her to shoot me if she saw me, though. Luckily, she did not. In fact, she was in the process of aiding and abetting my escape at the very moment he called. Screw that guy. Story 8. This isn't really as messed up as a cheating spouse, but my wife and I almost called off our wedding on account of her mom being a complete controlling and uncompromising bish. We had been together for almost 10 years when we decided to get married. We both decided to forego a formal wedding and just elope, and then have a celebration after the fact. After deciding this, we decided to call our siblings and parents to let them know. My parents were ecstatic, as was my brother, but when she called her parents, they flipped their shit. They ended up showing up at our house unannounced and proceeded to guilt trip us into the reasons why we should have a formal wedding. After about an hour of my soon-to-be mother-in-law telling us how selfish we were for not wanting to have a formal wedding, I relented. My rationale at the time was that I could be the bigger person and let her mother have the wedding she thought her daughter deserved. Unfortunately, that's where it all started to go downhill. Once that was agreed, her mom basically went off the deep end and became a controlling and conniving bish. We started by coming up with the guest list for the wedding. My wife and I wanted to keep the family list to a minimum and have most of our personal friends attend. However, her mom wanted almost none of our friends to come, the bare minimum of my family to come, while inviting all of her personal friends and relatives. We're talking about people my wife and I didn't even know, and family that neither of us had ever met. What we had envisioned as a wedding of less than 80 people suddenly turned into almost 300, and so it went. Every time we came up with what we wanted our wedding to be like, it was quickly thrown out the window and replaced by what her mother wanted. To make matters worse, when my wife or I tried to stand our ground and fight for what we wanted, her mother took it as us being ungrateful and basically guilt-tripped my wife into submission. Not only did this make dealing with the wedding a complete pain in not to mention completely ruining any possibility of looking back on our wedding in a positive light, it almost tore our relationship apart due to the crazy levels of stress we both were going through in dealing with her mother. After finally realizing that our wedding wasn't about us at all and was more about her mom getting the wedding she always envisioned for her daughter and showing off to her friends and relatives, we sat down and threatened to call the whole thing off at the last minute and elope if her mom didn't stop being a complete bish. Once her mom realized that we were serious and she knew she would have to explain to all of her friends why her daughter had called off the wedding within a few weeks of the ceremony, she wised up and bit her tongue while we changed her master plans. We ended up having the ceremony, had most of the things we originally planned on, but made concessions to her mother to avoid any further BS. However, this did not stop her from making a few unexpected and unknown changes to the ceremony and reception without us knowing, i.e. changing the menu, the decorations, the floral arrangements, party favors, and seating assignments. I can't really speak for my wife on this, but for me, the whole thing ruined the wedding for me. Additionally, my wife no longer has the relationship with her parents that she had before all this went down. She used to talk to her parents at least 2 to 3 times a week, and now they're lucky to hear from her once every couple of months. Story 9. After a day of trying on wedding dresses, just me and my maid of honor, we met my family and hubby-to-be at my brother's house for dinner. While showing a picture of myself in a dress to my mother, which was on my BFF's phone, she gets a text message from my fiance. This is odd because I can see him in the next room, and I can see my friend in the kitchen. I read it, of course, and it's a huge confession from him to her, addressing how they had fooled around a few weeks ago, and he was really regretting he hadn't taken things further with her. He had no idea I had her phone in my hand. I simply stood up and walked the 10 feet to him, held up her phone, and looked him in the eye. The look on his face was priceless, and when I could speak, I and my entire family let them both have it verbally. We're black, so you can imagine that was quite the showdown. Needless to say, I don't speak to either of them anymore. Story 10. The lies. Oh my goodness, the lies. Here's some background. My fiancé had baggage. I knew that, as in I was going to be okay with becoming stepmom to 3 children, a daughter-in-law to 2 crappy parents, and sister-in-law to a stupid mess of a woman, and knew that I would be bringing home the bacon. I even bought a house that would be big enough to house him and the 3 kids, but he told me he never married his baby mama and that he would leave my house at night for occasional night shift work as a cop. I asked to see the court decision regarding the kids, just so I knew what was going on. He kept the first page from me that read, divorce decree. So when his parents made a second marriage comment, I was thrown for a loop. This was a pretty big thing to keep from your wife-to-be in 6 months. I told him to leave and he swore up and down that was the only thing he lied about. I called his employer, and it turns out he's not a cop either. So I have no idea where he went when he left the house that I was paying for, and I immediately went to get tested. Yeah, the frigging lies. Story 11. I'm thinking of doing exactly this. My fiance is very abusive to me verbally, and I've shut down from wanting wanting to talk or be intimate with her. We got engaged last November after dating for 2.5 years, but after moving in, she wants to argue with me several times a day and regularly tells me how she can always find something that I do that makes her angry each day. She's 33 and a PhD. I'm 35 and a business owner in video games. I feel like I'm exploring new depths of my reservoir of patience, and I go out of my way to diffuse her temper, which rarely works. I've typically been a happy, kind person, but feel like a wilted flower whose spirit has been sapped by her negativity. I fully admit I'm working up the courage to end the engagement, move out of the home, and just enjoy some alone time, peace, and then begin to heal and move on to a better life. Sorry for the venting. It's tough to admit this to friends and family as most everyone thinks things are going well. Story 12. I have some friends who had no choice but to cancel their wedding due to piss-poor planning and trying to get their cake and eat it too. Here is what not to do when planning a wedding. 1. They decided on an in-state destination wedding, a spot 4 hours away. They also sent save the dates out to guests. 2. After already putting down a deposit and not really budgeting what they needed to for a wedding, the groom was fired for watching porn at work. 3. Because of new money issues, they decided to cut the guest list over half. People who were cut received a mass email saying they were uninvited due to financial reasons. Why they didn't personally call people is beyond me. 4. The next day after rejection letters went out, all the women still got a bachelorette party invite. Everyone but one person on that guest list were cut from the wedding. I never saw so many declines in a matter of an hour. 5. The following day, everyone who was cut from the wedding got an invite to a wedding blessings party. In a nutshell, a consolation potluck party for not making the cut to the wedding. We're registered for gifts at this place. Yada yada. Yada. At this point, my wife was so irate. We were uninvited to the wedding, where we already put a non-refundable deposit on a hotel. Then we are invited to the bachelorette party, which cost $400 and a blessing party, and we're expected to buy a gift. My wife made me write the groom a nasty letter telling him to stop inviting us to things after uninviting us to the wedding. I heard that I was not the only one to write a letter like this. 6. Days later, we are told that the blessings party and bachelorette party were canceled because 90% of the guest list declined. The bride-to-be was so upset, embarrassed, and so hurt by the decisions made by the groom, she decided not to marry him. She canceled the wedding entirely. Moral of the story: plan out your wedding properly and don't look at corn at work when you have a $80,000 plus a year salary while trying to plan a destination wedding. Story 13. Too many I know somebody who posts, I called off my wedding. I called it off because I realized we weren't ready to make a marriage work. There are a number of skills that a couple needs to have before they can really succeed in a relationship that's meant to last a lifetime. These skills are pretty obvious: compromise, forgiveness, sacrifice, and an acceptance of the things you don't like but can never change. Shortly before the wedding, I realized that we didn't have those skills. That made me extremely uncomfortable with the prospect of going through with it, and ultimately, I couldn't bring myself to start something that I knew couldn't last forever. The mistake we made was getting engaged before we knew we had those skills, before we were ready. We gave ourselves a long engagement with the idea that we'd have time to figure out those skills before the big day finally came. But we didn't realize that it put a timer on our relationship, which essentially turned it into a time bomb. When the day came, we were either going to be ready or we were going to have a very bad time. Story 14. Too many reasons to list. She was a wonderful person, but she got cold feet and stopped talking to me. Later, she left me for one of our friends. We were really close, and it was devastating to me that she couldn't come and talk to me, that she didn't trust me enough to sit down and talk things out. I guess she was scared, or she simply wasn't attracted to me anymore. I don't really know. The pain of that loss still haunts me, and I still feel the madness coming on every once in a while, but it has been almost 5 years, and I finally feel like myself again. I hope she is happy, though. All my friends think I hate her. I don't hate her. I just hope she was able to find what she needed. I talked to her for a while after we split up. We were friends again for a bit, but I couldn't deal with interacting with the guy she left me for because he was the kind of person that thought he did nothing wrong when in fact he helped to push us to our breaking point by pretending to be helpful to us during our difficult time, all the while acting as a wedge between us. To this day, anytime I see him, I get urges to tear him apart. A quiet rage in my head that I ignore because I know it isn't worth it. I don't hate her. She apologized and tried to help me, even though I was pretty much out of my head insane with grief during the months after we'd split up. By far, it was the hardest thing I've gone through in life so far. Death I can accept, but knowing she is alive and well, and that she is no longer a part of my life in any capacity, is the hard part. Story 15. Was going to get married in March 2012, and called it off in January of that year. Basically, it just came down to a disagreement on what we wanted out of life. I was 23 at the time, would have been 24 at the wedding. She was 27. She wanted kids. Like almost immediately, I told her that we needed to wait on that. I'm still in college. I wanted to get a job and a home and whatnot first, but she was completely unwilling to compromise on it. She demanded that we have kids before she was 30, so within a year or two of the wedding, and there's no way that I would be ready for kids by 25/26, especially as I'm still working on college. This was causing more and more of a divide between us, and I knew that if we had gotten married, that either I would have gotten what I wanted, and we would have waited for kids and she would have resented me, or she would have gotten what she wanted and we would have had kids, and both I would resent her and we would have a kid, or kids that we were unprepared to take care of. I still miss her every day, though, and always wonder if I made the right decision. Story 16. I was in a relationship with a longtime BF. 7 years when we got engaged. I had just finished school and we had been together for so long, so it was the next step. Important note, I am Costa Rican. Women here are raised to be wives. Even educated women that go to college and have a degree are expected to be quiet, lovely girls who worship their man and cater to him. So I did exactly that during my relationship with this turd. I was really young when I met him, so that gave him time to mold me to his preference. It got to a point where I believe it borderlined abuse. For example, when I was going somewhere, I had to call him and ask him which road to take. Or I could only go to the movies with him. If I did anything without him, he would get mad at me. I often had to dumb myself because he said I often offended him with my comments. And I did all that. I did, not only because I viewed it as normal, but because I honestly and truly believed that this was IT, that I should take it because this was my only shot at being loved. See, I've never been a pretty girl. I am not ugly, but I'm not pretty. And I have a personality. Boy, do I have one? And that is a bad quality for a girl. So I dumbed myself and repressed my personality and played along. Anyway, we got engaged and decided we were going to get married in a year. A couple of months later, I found out he's cheating on me. We fight. He apologizes. I forgive him. He then proceeds to be a total jerk for the next months, increasingly controlling and just being downright mean. And I took all this. I remember that I was out with him and some friends one night, and he was particularly mean to me that day. We left and got in the car, and I just started sobbing, and he apologized. He always did after being a jerk. And I told him, I always thought that when I got married, I would be in love. And it was true. I did not love him anymore. I had fallen out of love with him, slowly. And those words at that moment became the first step on the ladder to leave him. I then got a job. He was not happy about that because with a job comes independence and comes self-worth, things that I needed. I started feeling that there was life without him. And then I found out that he had some loans he hadn't told me about. And that was it. That was the last straw. Something I can't explain came over me. I suddenly had the courage to leave him. I made up my mind. There was no more forgiving. I called it off. We broke up. This was the hardest thing I had to do in my life. This was me standing up for myself. This was me going against everyone in my life. Invites were sent. Places were booked. I didn't give a crap. My family was devastated, but I was happy. Oh, I was so happy. And everyone was so mad at me because I was happy. But they didn't know. They had no idea what I had been going through for the last few years, so they thought it was inappropriate for me to be so happy. After that, I did things that are unheard of for women in my family. I became independent, got an apartment, traveled on my own, started reading and listening to the music I wanted, and basically letting me be me. I lost friends and family after this decision, but it was worth it. I'm such a happy person now, almost 30 and successful in my work. I still hope a man will come by that likes smart, independent, opinionated women that will love me, but I have also made peace with the fact that it may not happen, and I'm happy and proud of myself, and I am truly living the best years of my life, and that's what matters. Story 17. An old friend of mine called off his wedding because he found out she slept some dude at her bachelorette party the weekend before. He waited until the day of the wedding to call it off because he wanted her to have to explain it to her family, most of whom flew into town for the wedding. I was one of his groomsmen, so instead of saying his vows, we all took him out onto the town while in the tuxes. It was still a pretty depressing night out, and he was pretty tore up about it for months. Story 18, I don't think I've seen this one yet. Emotional affair. We were together for 7 years and were getting married in a few months. We'd already bought a house and started tying our lives together. She was emotionally distant for some time, but I ignored it like a fool in love. Eventually, I noticed she was spending significant time chatting with a guy she met on World of Warcraft. She was also taking phone calls from a friend in private. I called her on it, and our wedding was off the next day. We bought our house during the mortgage bubble, and now I'm stuck with an underwater mortgage on a house that's lost 50% of its value. I also still have the ring. It's been almost 5 years, and I'm still not sure what to do with it. Story 19. My best friend called her wedding off 9 days before the big day. She discovered that he had emptied their joint wedding account playing online poker after he emptied his own personal account. She explained that the feeling of losing a down payment on a house as well as the catering money wasn't anything compared to how she felt when he asked her for her inheritance from her mother. She had passed a year previously to pay off more gambling debts. No apologies, no mea culpas, just more money. She walked, and 8 years later, she's happily married to another guy with one boy and a bun in the oven. Story 20. A friend of mine was engaged to a girl. He was your typical SAP. He'd been on literally dozens of first dates from OkCupid and had had no luck with the ladies. Really nice guy, but completely socially lacking. She turned out to be a pathological liar. She was an army vet. She practiced underwater knife fighting. She came from old money, but her part of the money had been spent on an incredibly lavish wedding ceremony. She had a daughter, or maybe she didn't, or maybe the girl was her niece or her friend's kid. She was military police. The lies got so bad that she decided to move across the country in the middle of the night with my friend to avoid a warrant out for her arrest, fraud, and impersonating a police officer. She told him that there were jobs for both of them waiting there with her family business. He had been working on a PhD, but had dropped out at her suggestion, so he wasn't working at all and they were broke. So they moved in with her mom, and there weren't jobs for either of them. I think to distract him from that fact, she told him she was pregnant. A miracle, he proposed. The ultrasound photo she showed him showed up on the first page of Google image results for ultrasound. He finally broke it off. He called his dad to get some money to fly home. She called him a few weeks later from jail to talk about their baby and how she was going to get an abortion if he didn't get back together with her. The lady, she was nuts. Story 21. We were both fairly young. I was 21, he was 23. We were responsible, self-sufficient. We bought a house together. He was my first kiss and I was head over heels. We got engaged 4 years into the relationship and then everything started falling apart. He started to get controlling, no longer wanting me to go out with friends or even my sister. When it came to me telling him we just couldn't afford a new TV or some other non-essential, he would pout and withhold love. If I wasn't perfectly happy, he wouldn't talk to me. I was considering breaking it off when he decided that he wanted to try backdoor activities, whether I wanted to or not. The only thing I could think of through the pain and tears was that this was only going to get worse. I was devastated that the person I loved would just keep going while I was begging him to stop. Breaking off my engagement was the best decision I ever made. I've gained all of my confidence back and happier than I ever was in that relationship. I'm never settling again. I deserve better. Story 22. You know that Bridezilla show? Pretty much was like that. Yeah, this is a friend of mine. Story, sorry. Well, this bakery had a thing of not doing wedding cakes because the brides typically go ape crap over them, no matter how perfect they are, and demand alterations on the very day of the wedding that have nothing to do with the original description of the cake. My friend's fiancée, though, she was friends with the owner of the bakery, so she decided to make it just to be nice. Part of her gift for the wedding, a free cake. The bride went absolutely bat crap over the cake. She was screaming and yelling and in tears over this cake. This was the day before, so the friend trying to be nice decided to remake the cake from scratch and got zero sleep that night working on it. Me, the bride and groom were in the bakery there to pick up the cake the next day, and she just got so angry she picked it up and threw the cake over the counter where there were several customers, screaming her lungs out over how her friend ruined her wedding and how awful the cake was. She then turned to the groom and said, "What are we going to do about the wedding now?" In which the groom responded with, "What wedding? I wish I had a camera, holy crap." They were both black, and it was a black neighborhood, so the store pretty much turned into an episode of Maury or Jerry Springer. Story 23. I had to call mine off because the man I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, or so I thought, decided to sit me down the night before and tell me all about the trysts and flings he had been having throughout our relationship together. He said if he doesn't come clean now, he would not be able to live with himself. After the list was done, I was crying my eyes out. He said something along the lines of, "Well, I didn't think you would take it this hard. Seriously, we were going to have a huge wedding, even though I really didn't want a huge one. Weird, I guess, but I never envisioned my wedding growing up like other little girls. So I had to call tons and tons of people and tell them it was off. Listen to them try to console me over the phone, crying every time I hung it up. He told me he didn't want to call anyone because he was so upset with me calling it off. He didn't want to see me ever again. That worked because I found someone who actually loves me, and we have been married for 3.5 years with a beautiful 2.5-year-old son, and he has never cheated on me. I never thought I could trust again, but I am still slowly getting over that fear after all these years. It was 12 years ago. Story 24. My fiancée called it off when she found out I wasn't rich. Apparently, there's a guy with the same name as me who is heir to this huge fortune, whereas I'm just some idiot from a lower middle-class family. She came into my life like a dream, and I was so taken with her. I thought that it was like a fantasy come true. When she met my family and found out who they were, she literally ran from the house. I had to track her down and found out after the fact that she was trying to get with someone she thought was an heir. I did a lot of growing up that year. Fortunately for me, she didn't get what she wanted either. The guy she was after turned out to be gay, and she now makes a living waiting tables. Story 25. 35 years ago, I did that. I was a young naval officer and set to marry the girl I fell in love with at college. I got cold feet 3 days before the event and canceled it. It wasn't because I had had second thoughts about her. It was the stupid idea that I thought I could either be a good husband or a good submarine officer. I didn't think I could do both. About 9 months later, I got a call from her, about 1,000 miles away, and I found out that she had a new boyfriend. It just devastated me. I did everything I could to regain her confidence, but it took almost a year. During that year, I was stationed at the submarine base in Bangor, Washington, and she was 2,400 miles away in Cincinnati, Ohio, with that POS rich boyfriend hounding her daily. It really took a toll on me. I had many sleepless nights imagining the worst. I didn't give up, though. A few months before we were scheduled to relocate to Submarine Squadron 1 in Pearl Harbor, I took a chance and drove to Cincinnati. I convinced her to come back to Bangor with me and made the trip through the Southwest and then back up the California coast along the Pacific. It was as much like a honeymoon as I could make it on my limited salary, and it was memorable. By the time we reached Washington, Mount St. Helens erupted. We were on the highway about 40 miles from it when it blew. The sky just turned black and the mud flows washed out the bridges north of us. We were rerouted along the coast and finally made it to Bangor. She had to return to Cincinnati, but this time it was with the plan to return to Washington. When she flew back, we eloped with a justice of the peace. That was almost 33 years ago. We have 3 sons and we couldn't be happier. Our boys are all grown up, and I'm not far from retirement. Marrying her was the best, smartest thing I ever did. Story 26. I went on my first date at the age of 23. Having never been in a relationship before, I thought everything was going well. About 3 months in, we got pregnant. She told me that she was on the pill and that it was possible that she couldn't even get pregnant. This was a shock to my system, and we separated briefly following the announcement. We got back together, though, and really tried to make it work. My daughter was born in August, very near our 1-year anniversary. My daughter is the greatest person in the world, and she's done more for me than she'll ever know. I've learned so much through her about responsibility and being an adult. Shortly after my daughter's birth, her mother began pushing the marriage issue, and I saved up to buy a ring. I proposed, and for some time it made things better between us. The situation was just too difficult, though. We had nothing in common other than our daughter. Before long, she was again being verbally and psychologically abusive to me, but having never been treated like that, I didn't understand what I was doing wrong. I began seeing a therapist, which helped me realize that I wasn't in a healthy relationship. Finally, after an argument in which she threatened me with physical violence, I knew that things were just too toxic to continue. I definitely looked like the bad guy, but I had to make the best choice for the future of all those involved. The most difficult part was coming to the conclusion that this situation continuing around my daughter would actually be worse for her than us being apart. Story 27. This is one time religion helped me a great deal. I was engaged to a girl and we were living together but had known each other for less than a year. She was a true nympho, and I was fine with that at 22. We went to meet the preacher who was going to marry us, and he suggested we stop being intimate for the 2 months before the wedding to make the night more special. So we did. We found out rather quickly we had very little in common outside the bedroom, and I wisely chose to call things off. Not too long after that, I met my soulmate, and we've been married for 19 years now. Story 28. My old boss was engaged to be married. You could kind of tell he wasn't all that enthusiastic about getting hitched, but instead of using his words, he used his dong and did it with an S-worker on his bachelor holiday and told his fiancée this was about 2 weeks before the actual wedding. After she frog-marched him to the doctor to get them both tested for STDs, she called off the wedding unsurprisingly. The thing he was most pissed off about was he didn't get a deposit back on the reception venue. What a guy. Story 29. I was about 2 months away from getting married to someone I had been living with for about a year. I was getting fitted for my wedding dress when I looked in the mirror and thought to myself, I really hope he and I can stay friends after we're divorced. Then I thought, wait, did I really just think that? I got honest with myself and realized that at most I had lukewarm feelings for this guy, and that I had only been thinking about the wedding day, but not the marriage or the life we were going to live together. I was 21 and just wanted to get married without having really understood what that meant. I called it off, moved away, and met the love of my life 3 months later. We've been together for 11 years now, married for almost 4, and are expecting our first baby this summer. Best decision I ever made. Story 30. My ex-girlfriend's mother's wedding was called off because they found the groom's brother dead on a rural road in Manitoba, Canada. He had been missing for 3 weeks. When the groom said he couldn't do it that day, the bride lost her mind, saying that just because his brother got himself killed, he was adventurous, she shouldn't have to delay the wedding. After about 2 hours of arguing, he and I, along with his family, left. I broke up with her, so did he. The groom and I are still good friends to this day. Story 31. I called off my engagement because the moment I stopped being his girlfriend and started being his future wife was the moment I stopped being a person to him and became his lost property. He hit me, he forced himself on me, he tried to stop me talking to my family or friends. It was scary, and I loved him and was so confused. We'd been together years, and he was so nice. What on earth happened? I spent a few months trying to fix it back to how it was before the engagement, then gave up and ran away. He wasn't going to change, and even if he did, I couldn't forgive him anymore. We hadn't set a date yet, our families couldn't agree on location, style, or season, and he just wanted right now registry office, which nobody but him wanted. Story 32. My mom was engaged to a guy who called off their wedding 2 weeks beforehand. At the time, he said it was because his family didn't support his remarriage. She stuck with him and eventually married him a few years later. It turned out he had at least 2 other wives during this time. She found this all out when he had a stroke and died, and another wife showed up at the hospital. In the end, Mom lost everything, and now she lives with me. Story 33. We didn't have a wedding scheduled, but we were engaged and were planning to start planning a wedding. Nothing happened. No one cheated. No one hit anyone. There was not a big fight. The relationship just sort of crumbled, and about 8 months after getting engaged, we decided to just be friends. In retrospect, the engagement wasn't what was the problem. The relationship was already on the downhill, and I think I proposed to try to put some magic back into the relationship. So here's a tip. Being engaged or married won't fix a structurally flawed relationship. Story 34. First of all, we were too young. We had been living together for a few years, were serious about each other, and felt like it was the next step. We got engaged, planned the wedding for the next summer, paid tons of deposits. I had a dress and everything. The entire time it felt off, just stressful, and I constantly had this what if I'm making a huge mistake feeling. I should have listened sooner, but 4 months before the big day I called it off. His drinking and drug use had gotten extremely out of control. I realized I couldn't fix him, and as much as it hurt, I knew we'd never have a happy life with his addiction issues. I moved my stuff out that next day and told him to leave me alone and never talk to me again because I needed a clean break. That fall, I started grad school and a new life without him. Several months after we split, he contacted me, telling me he'd been in AA for a couple of months and needed to make amends as part of his program. I went back to our old place to meet him and saw a different man than I had ever seen. It's been almost 2 years since we split and called off our wedding, and he's been sober that entire time. I'm happy to say we're getting married this summer, and this time everything feels right. I've gone to at least 1 meeting a week with him, and while I know he's never cured of alcoholism, the fact that he got sober in spite of me, not because of me, increases the likelihood that he'll keep at it. For anyone considering calling off their wedding, I implore you to do so. The wedding train is a tough one to jump off once it leaves the station, but it can be done, and I'm happy to talk to anyone who has questions. Story 35. I got engaged for the wrong reasons. I thought since I graduated college, it would be the next logical step, but as I started planning the wedding, I could feel in my gut that I was making a horrible decision. I still followed him over 1,000 miles away to the city he was planning on attending law school at, but it all fell apart shortly after moving. It was a pretty awful breakup. He stole or sold nearly all of my games and threatened to essay me if I didn't leave the apartment, but now I know I made the right call and things are a lot better. Story 36. This is about a coworker and friend. She, who I'll call Cindy, was 21 at the time. Her soon-to-be husband, who I'll call Ed, was 24. They had dated for about a year until Ed proposed to Cindy. They were a happy couple. Everything was going right for them. They were the type of couple who would always talk about their SO and brag about them. That was until Ed brought up the prenup agreement. Before continuing, let me just say that Cindy comes from a very wealthy family. Ed isn't on good terms with his family, and they aren't very wealthy, but he has a bright future ahead of him and is a smart, diligent worker. Also, Cindy's father is a very prominent figure in Ed's field of work. They never talked about a prenup, and all of a sudden, Ed gets his own lawyer to prepare one and presents it to Cindy. The terms basically said that if they were to break up, the house, the kids, and major property like cars, furniture, etc. would all be Ed's. Cindy was very distraught. She got her own lawyer and tried to propose a revised prenup on equal terms for both of them. Ed and his lawyer rejected it right away and would not budge. This was when things got bad. Cindy's father was paying for most of the wedding, was going to pay the down payment on their first home, and had also helped Ed previously by buying him a car. Considering all this, it just didn't seem right. Ed's argument was that he would be the main financial provider in the family, and thus he should be entitled to the property and the kids. Anyway, Cindy called off the wedding about a month before the date. Ed tried to reason with her. He wanted to get back together and go through with the marriage. However, he still would not budge on the prenup terms. Cindy obviously refused to listen and cut him out of her life. She was very depressed and felt humiliated since people in our work industry heard about it. I think she got through it just fine, since so many people supported her. Story 37. A former roommate of mine was dumped 2 weeks before her wedding. Her fiancé had moved away for a job a few months before the wedding, and in that time he found a new girl. My poor roommate lost most of the deposits and couldn't even return her dress. Then, to add insult to injury, she had to cancel the 2 weeks' notice she'd already put in at her job because she was supposed to move to where he lived after the wedding. All's well that ends well, though. She moved on and met a wonderful guy. They just got married a few months ago. Story 38. I was to be married in June of this year. We had been dating for about 4.5 years, living together for almost 2. I called it off a few weeks back. There were a lot of issues in our relationship, communication being one of the biggest, along with violence and anger issues. Instead of things staying the same or getting better after I proposed, things got worse, a lot worse. Fighting all the time, no physical intimacy. I didn't even want to be around her. It got to the point that I would dread going home when I knew she was there. I would find any excuse not to go home or to stay out later. I went away on vacation for a week without her back in January. After a whole week of not thinking about her or missing her in the slightest, I realized that this was not the person I could spend the rest of my life with. She was not my best friend. And a lot of the impetus for both moving in with her and proposing was pressure from her to do so. I still care about her and want her to be happy. I just knew that I couldn't be the one to do so. It was a tough breakup because there was a lot of emotion from her side. She wasn't willing to accept that I wasn't happy in the relationship, and although she offered to work to make things right, I felt the relationship had run its course. I moved out a couple of weeks ago and I couldn't be happier. Story 39. I was in an incredibly abusive relationship. In fact, the only reason I said yes to begin with was fear of what would happen if I said no. My fiancé at the time left for 3 months, and since he had alienated me from all of my friends, I started hanging out with the soon-to-be best man of our wedding, because I knew nothing would be inappropriate and my fiancé wouldn't mind. Soon after, the best man and I fell in love, and then we found out that his ex and my fiancé had been cheating on us with each other for years. After we found that out, we no longer felt guilt for how we felt about each other. I called off the wedding, and almost 2 years later, I married the best man. We've now been in a very happy, respectful, and loving relationship for 2 years, and I learned how love should be. Story 40. Long story short, I met a girl. She seemed great. She accepted me and my past as it was and supported me through the tail end of it. She opened up about her past, and I did everything I could to support her through it. After about a year, I proposed and things were going well. But then they took a dramatic turn for the worst. She became furious over me hanging out with friends who still smoked, tore a chunk out of me for being late to a dinner at Boston Pizza. Nothing special, just a regular dinner. Told me I needed new clothes, a different music taste, and that I had to make at least 6 figures to take care of her. The real kicker was when she tried to get me to stop talking to my family about wedding plans and what I wanted to do career-wise, saying it wasn't any of their business. Things kept getting worse, and I realized how controlling she was. She left me a few days after Valentine's Day saying I wasn't ready because I didn't have my career in order and couldn't be mature enough to stop my hobbies because they were childish, going to concerts, playing darts at the pub with my dad, etc. I was confused and broken. A few weeks later, she started seeing other guys and going to clubs completely drunk, but still tried to convince me there was hope for us once my life was on track. After coming home from a summer job as a camp counselor, I told her that it was completely over, even though she left me first. Story 41. 2 weeks before the big day is when I called off my wedding. It all went down the weekend after her bachelorette party. Fast forward to late Monday morning. I get a phone call from her maid of honor. May have been the only call I ever received from her. I can't remember exactly how I felt, but I can still replay that moment. Anyway, she tells me, "You cannot marry Crazy Bish." She then begins to explain that at the party, all of her lies caught up with her. She had about 3 small, different groups of friends together sharing stories. While out and about doing what they do, different stories from different friends started running into each other. It's hard for me to explain, but one example is when she claimed to have a modeling contract at an agency. Then another friend would say, "No, she doesn't have a modeling contract. I do with that agency." Basically, she used her friend's stories as her own. After the conversation, I was stunned for a moment. I felt empty but emotionless. The next thing I remember is walking back to my computer on the sales floor and changing passwords to important accounts. I told my manager that I had to leave. My reason: "I'm not getting married anymore, sir." It was good enough. After I got out of there, I went and talked to the priest. Told him the wedding was most likely not going down. I called the reception hall. That guy was pissed because I was supposed to write him a check the next day. Lost the deposit, though. I met up with the maid of honor, another bridesmaid, and a friend. They took her out to dinner to stall and confront her about everything while I tried to move as much stuff out of the apartment as I could. I had help from the friend while getting things out, filled up my cars, and drove to my parents. My mother was shocked, but happy because she hated her. My fiancé called when she got back, but I didn't answer. Didn't even talk to her for a few days. In hindsight, I could see all her lies. Some things seemed a little unbelievable, but she was always able to back them up when I started to get curious. I dodged a huge freaking bullet. Story 42. 3 months before the wedding, my fiancé tells me he has been unhappy for a long time and did not want to get married. We were going to get married on our 9-year anniversary. He said we are incompatible and it took him 9 years to figure it out. He left me with a wedding dress and rings, and I had to cancel everything and move out. Not too exciting, but pretty baffling. Story 43. My girlfriend called off her wedding with her last ex. They had been dating for a couple of years and were engaged for 6 or 7 months. She claims she realized it was not what she wanted because they were not really in love, etc. We actually started dating the day they had planned to be married. I have mixed feelings about it. I guess I worry that she may be afraid to commit someday if we were to be married. I do not see it as a big deal anymore because I am very happy and the relationship is going great, but it still crosses my mind sometimes. Story 44. My dad and almost stepmother were to be getting married in Mexico. We went there a week early for a vacation, and my dad's fiancée got way shit-faced off of SoCo strawberry daiquiris. When I tried to bring her back to the room to avoid a scene, she strangled me and burnt me with a cigarette in front of the whole resort pool. I knew she had a touch of crazy, but that was it for my dad. We went to the airport, switched out our tickets for a flight the next day, and also swapped the tickets my dad had bought for her family to go to Florida later that summer. She called angry at us because her family came down the next day for the wedding, and we apparently embarrassed her. Yup, story 45, the lying and cheating. I knew of one cheating instance before and threw it out, young and naive. He finally confessed after I lost our second child that he made out with a girl in our home, but could not remember if it was before or after he asked me to marry him. I took my ring off. Later, I found out about all the other cheating times, 15 total. I got tested and I am clean. Thank God. It took a toll though. I hated most people for a while after that. No throwaway because my boyfriend now knows all my baggage and I am glad it stopped when it did. He is a douche and is now married to a woman who cheats on him all the time. Karma is a bish. Story 46. Why not? Here's my post that will get buried and like 3 people will read. My ex-boyfriend and I got engaged when I was in my early 20s and he was in his mid-20s. I think I was just in love with the idea of being married. Once we told his mom, she started to plan a church wedding. The problem is that I am an ex-Catholic, now atheist. They wanted me to go see a priest and also go as a couple to ask the priest for permission to get married. No priest in his right mind, not that they are all there already, would ever recommend a Catholic marrying me. That was one of the problems. The other major issue is that while I was working part-time and in college, his goal was to work for a major retailer for the rest of his life. He actually saw this as a career, think Walmart. He had no desire to buy health insurance. Ever. Why should I? The government can pay for it. He wanted to have kids and teach them a language I could not speak because his family all spoke it, and I should too. And he had no desire, as a man in his mid-20s, to move out of his parents' house. He still got grounded at 24. His parents paid for his car insurance and everything else. Not to mention he had never cooked or cleaned anything his whole life. His mom still washed his underwear and folded his socks. Needless to say, I came to my senses after really taking a look at the big picture. His desire deep down was for me to be barefoot and pregnant at home 24/7. I had no desire to be anything like that. In the end, it took him cheating on me with a girl who was exactly like him, who also worked at the retail store and had the same goals in life, for me to get some sense knocked into me. I told myself that after him, I would set some standards for myself and really stick to them. Plot twist? Today is my 5-year wedding anniversary with my husband. He has a bachelor's degree and is working on his master's, something my ex never had a desire to pursue. A stable, well-paying career, not in retail, actually requires knowledge and skills, and has accepted me and loved me for who I am. I am so thankful to have found someone who loves me the way he does. As for the ex, he is living at home with his parents, with 2 kids, and both he and his wife still work at the retail store. I heard he proposed to her at the checkout lanes while wearing his work vest. Me? I am almost done with my RN. Story 47. I was 9 months away from getting married when a series of very shitty events occurred in my life. I thought my fiancé and I were perfect for each other, but in retrospect, I think it is just easy to assume that when life is easy and you do not have any real problems to deal with. It all started when my grandfather offed himself. He had just been diagnosed with leukemia and decided he would rather take a quick way out, so he shot himself in my parents' home on his birthday. Obviously, I was a wreck about it, but it was made worse by my fiancé, who was an 8-hour plane journey away at the time and refused to come see me, even after I offered to pay for the flight myself. He said that flying out to see me when he could stay for only a short amount of time would not be worth it, and that when I stopped being so sad, I would agree with him. Then I developed an anxiety disorder that was so bad I had to spend time in a psychiatric hospital, drop out of college for a year, and move back home with my parents. My fiancé said he could not handle my being sick and that he did not like how I was not in school. So I ended it. and gave him back the ring. That was 3 years ago. That, and my family still thinks I made the wrong decision, that I was too demanding of him. Maybe that is true, but honestly, I would rather be alone than with someone who cannot support me the way I need when things are tough. Story 48, I asked her not to. My fiancée had this thing. She would walk out the door every time we had an argument. She would look me in the eye, say, "Well, F you then," and walk out. Sometimes I would not hear from her for a couple of days. The last argument we had, she started to walk out. I asked her not to. Then, as she was slamming the door, I said, "Do it. We are done." She drove off. I later asked for the ring back. She cried and begged me to reconsider. Nope. I met my wife of 10 years a couple of years later. I look back at that defining moment as I dodge a bullet. Story 49. I was about to make a huge mistake. I realized my fiancé was drinking too much, neglecting me emotionally, and was never actually there when I needed him. For example, a friend of mine died, and he did not want to go with me to the funeral because he had a magic tournament. I was marrying the completely wrong man, and thank God I realized it before it was too late and was brave enough to call it off. My family was super supportive. My super awesome grandmother took care of letting all the guests know. My dad had no problem with the money he lost and all the deposits. I gave my wedding cake to a homeless shelter since it was already paid for in full. 3 years later, I married a wonderful man who was everything the first guy was not. Story 50. I apologize in advance for the length, but I am incapable of telling a short story. I met a young, shy, inexperienced guy at a bar. He had never dated, had few intimate experiences, and little social skills, but he was cute and shy, and I wanted him. I was, and am, the exact opposite. We were friends with benefits for about 8 years, most of which I was in love with him, but he always insisted I was not the one for him and that he had his reasons. 8 years in, we tried to have a real relationship, but his family was strongly against it and badgered him daily until he broke up with me. It took us over a year to rebuild the friendship. No physical relation, only emails, chase dates every now and then. I kept him at arm's length and my guard up. I fully gave up on him. I came to my senses and realized I did not want someone who truly did not want me. We were just friends. Towards the end of that rebuilding year, he started talking about us being together, but always in a playful, half-joking way. And I always giggled and laughed it off. Finally, after a year and 2 months of this newfound friendship, he sat me down and told me, in a serious way, for the first time ever, that he wanted to be with me, despite all the reasons we should not be together. He was very successful and financially sound. I am the type who just has a job and am pretty bad with money. He was physically fit, athletic, and ate healthy. I was, and am, overweight and not very athletic, but he was always wildly attracted to me and bigger girls, even though he wished he wasn't. He always insisted he wanted kids, and I always insisted I did not. I have ADHD and sometimes deal with anxiety and depression, but I was and am medicated and in therapy. He was always very supportive. He was more of an introvert, happy to stay at home with a few close friends, and I was and am very outgoing, with tons of friends and a vibrant social life. We discussed all of these differences in a mature, serious way, and he said, "I'm okay not having kids as long as I get to be with you for the rest of my life." We agreed that we balance each other out and can help each other with the things we lack in our lives. He had finally realized and was able to proudly say how much he loved me despite our differences. I was skeptical, but also so very happy because I had always wanted this. Both our families happily welcomed the other, and it was lovely and precious. I moved in. We dated seriously and happily for 2 years. We were everyone's favorite love story. It finally fell into place. We were the Carrie Bradshaw and Mr. Big of our circle of friends and family. We got through our hurdles and differences. At 2 years, we got engaged, announced it to our friends and family, and started planning a wedding. He never actually proposed. It was more of a discussion while we stood in the kitchen in our pajamas making breakfast on a Sunday. It happened for a few Sundays until I finally asked him if he was serious about telling his parents. He said he was. That is how we got engaged. I knew him well enough to know that this is his way, and I was okay with it. I loved him. We placed a deposit on a venue and did some tastings at caterers, planned a guest list, table seating, song lists, and so on. We were in happy planning mode for 2 months. We were to have a very unique wedding filled with microbrew, home-cooked BBQ, a blend of jazz, metal, and rock, no dance floor, and no bridal party. We were going to do it our way, and we were so happy. Then he changed his mind, but he would not break up with me or call off the wedding. He just started voicing all of the feelings he had been keeping secret for a long time. My mental health issues and the fact that I only had a job and not a booming, college-educated career. All the things he knew about me for 10 years, and all the things he had been so supportive about. One day, it all just shattered. Night after night, he would voice his concerns as if he had already made up his mind. There was no discussing it, but he would still never speak the words, "We should break up and call off the wedding." After 2 weeks of his dancing around it, I had to say it through my tears. He admitted he had been feeling this way for a long time and confessed that the wedding had been a diversion for him while he got over his fears and cold feet about me, I moved into the computer room and slept on the futon. I lived in his condo for 2 months until I was able to get an apartment and move out. I made him call the venue and caterer and cancel our plans. We cannot be friends. We needed to completely detach out of fear that we would repeat this cycle again. I feel like I lost 10 years of my life to a boy, not a man. Story 51. I was engaged, never made it as far as the wedding. For the record, I am a lesbian, so I was engaged to a woman. I met my fiancé while I was working on my PhD. My fiancé still had one child under the age of 18. Her son was 8 when we first started going out. When I realized that I had feelings for her and our relationship could turn into a serious thing, 2 months after we started dating, I explicitly stated that I had no intention of staying in the area after I graduated and would likely be taking a job elsewhere, out of state, once I dissertated and graduated. I asked, "Is this going to be a problem? Would you be okay with moving?" Her response, "It won't be a problem. There is nothing in my divorce paperwork that says I can't move." Fast forward 3 years. I am dissertating. I have had several job interviews down south and out west. Many of those interviews turned into offers. Nothing in the Northeast. We are now engaged. My fiancé tells me to turn down those offers. Just look for any job in the area, and she will pay the bills. This is one of the most hurtful things she has said to me ever. I was emancipated as a teenager and put myself through college and a master's program already. It was a lot of work and sacrifice, which she knew about. During this entire 3-year period, not once has she attempted to talk to a family lawyer to come up with a game plan for moving out of state with her son. I take a job down south. I was down south for a year before she went to a lawyer. The lawyer told her that her son had an established relationship with his father, and it would be a protracted court battle to change visitation if she wanted to move. And that was the end of it. She refused to go to court. 3 years later, when my contract was up, I had more job offers in various parts of the country. She convinced me to turn them all down and move back to the Northeast while she paid the bills. I made it explicitly clear that there needed to be room in her apartment for me to get my work done, as I would have to be self-employed and working freelance until I could find something. I get back to the Northeast. All of my things are expected to fit into a 4x6 space. There is no room for my stuff or my work. Lots of promises were broken. When talk of marriage arrangements came up a few months later, I just flat out told her that I didn't feel like the things that I wanted or that made me happy were a priority for her, and I didn't want to get married at that time. Edit. Because I turned down jobs in my field to go back to our home state, I spent 2 years being unemployed. When I told her I no longer wanted to get married, she kicked me out. I lived in my car and out of a storage spot for a few months. I called up a friend, explained the situation, and she offered me a room in her house until I was back on my feet. I have finally found a job, but I make a fraction of what I made when I was employed in my field. All of my resources have been exhausted due to going so long without working. Story 52. We didn't have a wedding scheduled, but we were engaged and planning to start planning a wedding. Nothing happened. No one cheated. No one hit anyone. There was not a big fight. The relationship just sort of crumbled. And about 8 months after getting engaged, we decided to just be friends. In retrospect, the engagement wasn't the problem. The relationship was already on the downhill, and I think I proposed to try to put some magic back into it. So here's a tip. Being engaged or married won't fix a structurally flawed relationship. Story 53. We had been dating for 5 years and engaged for 6 months. I think it had to do with several issues, but what it came down to was that we could not reconcile our career differences, which led to a bunch of resentment on both sides. We started dating when we were 19. 2 years into our relationship, senior year of college, he decided he was going to join the Peace Corps. I had just accepted a graduate school position across the country and was expecting him to move with me. Instead, he accepted his Peace Corps nomination and was stationed a 6-hour flight away in South America. Same time zone, at least. I was infuriated. Many a fight was had. Nevertheless, we decided to stick it out and do long distance, but the damage had already been done. All my friends from college were getting engaged, and my boyfriend was not even physically with me. As a young woman fresh out of college, this was infuriating. But at this point in my life, I realized how petty it was. A couple of months into my first year of grad school, I broke up with him and entered the dating scene. We kept in touch, and it was obvious that we still loved each other. After a nostalgic visit with his parents over the holiday season, I bought a ticket to go visit him. We rekindled our relationship and did indeed stick it out for the entire 2-year Peace Corps stint. Flash forward now 4.5 years into the relationship. He moves across the country to be with me. We move in together. Everything is steady, comfortable. So we decide to get married. I'm wrapping up my master's and he is starting his. Something does not feel right. We start to argue all the time over little things. I realize I am still harboring resentment over his Peace Corps stint, and he is harboring resentment over the fact that I broke up with him and dated other people while he was gone. he still wanted to push through our issues and get married. I did not, but we had been together so long, a quarter of my life at this point, that I could not imagine a life without him. So I guess I took the coward's way out. I accepted a PhD position across the country. The summer before I started, I flew out to California to hike the Pacific Crest Trail. I told him it was to clear my head, but I promptly broke it off as soon as I had phone service. If I could go back in time and change things, I would have just broken up with him after he joined the Peace Corps and left it at that. I was too immature to deal with a long-distance relationship, and I do not think we were morally compatible anyway. Hiking the PCT, by the way, turned out to be the best decision I have ever made. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.